Well, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everyone. My name is Franklin Smith, and I'm a partner with the Simon Phoenix Group. And I'd like to take this opportunity of welcoming you all today to our very exciting webinar entitled "A Data-Driven Approach to Automated Conference Scheduling." Today's webinar is brought to you by the Simon Phoenix Group, developers of brand new software technology designed specifically for large in-person conferences, and that piece of software is called Juggler, which we're going to be talking about today. I wanted to give you a brief introduction as to what we're going to be covering this morning. And first of all, we have people registered representing the conference industry from Canada, the United States, Mexico, and Europe. So we're thrilled to have this kind of attendance for today's webinar. We're really excited to be able to introduce this brand new software technology to you. And I hope as I go through the presentation today, you'll see precisely why there is so much excitement about this. Primarily, we're thrilled that after 3+ years of COVID, the in-person conference industry is seeing a very nice rebound, and that's certainly good news for everyone associated with the industry, as well as us, because that's precisely why we developed Juggler, was to provide support and a lot of assistance and to fix a lot of the pain points that people in the conference industry, whether you're a PCO or whether you're an association or a consultant helping to put on events, there up until this point in time has been a lot of labor and a lot of pain in actually pulling together large in-person conference schedules. So this is why we're presenting this morning. I have my camera active right now. I'm going to turn my camera off in a couple of moments once I get into the actual presentation. Just a few brief housekeeping items. If you registered in advance for this webinar, then you will have already received a link to the PDF version of the PowerPoint slides. You're certainly more than welcome to download those. If you don't know where that link is or don't have access to it, not to worry. You can always send us an email to info@jugglerschedule.com. That's the email address you see on the screen right now. It's also been put into the chat. And we'll be more than happy to email that PDF copy of the slides today. Speaking about the chat, you can certainly type questions and comments into the chat. We're happy for people to type questions in as the presentation goes along. You don't need to wait until the end. And I say that for a couple of reasons. First of all, number one, we want to be able to address questions. But also, given the technology, sometimes there's some audio delays. We did test the audio this morning. It seems to be working fine. But having said that, if you want to type questions in as they come to you, that's not a problem, and we can deal with questions after the formal part of the presentation in about 30, 35, 40 minutes from now. So I want to spend just a couple of minutes and talk to you about what Juggler is all about. I know the topic of this webinar is automated conference scheduling, but Juggler has been designed with a very specific aim in mind. And we found through our experience in working with various conferences that there seems to have been a lot of effort and a lot of pain involved in actually pulling together a full scientific program schedule. Now, I'm not referring to the schedule that attendees try and pull together for various breakout sessions that they want to listen into when they're actually there in person at a conference. What I'm referring to is the big schedule that conference organizers need to pull together for the many hundreds of different presentations, and I'm speaking particularly for scientific conferences, for the many hundreds of presentations that they may receive, many more hundreds of authors, for a conference that may last for 3 or 4 days, have 7, 8, 10 concurrent breakout sessions going, and for which there may be multiple streams or themes or threads. That's a lot of data to have to deal with. And that's why the title of this webinar is a data-driven approach to automated conference scheduling. So it's with that in mind, and it's with that pain that has always been involved in the very laborious task of pulling together large conference schedules that Juggler has been developed, and that's really the focus for today's webinar. So without further ado, I'm going to just turn off my camera right now. There we go. And we will get into the actual formal part of the webinar right now. So when we're talking about conferences and conference schedules, there are all sorts of different conferences, conference styles, way conferences are organized. What we're really referring to is the classic type of conference, a scientific conference that may have 350, 400 or more presentations, that goes through a formal call for papers. Many associations, PCOs, use formalized content management software that allows authors to upload their abstracts and bios and presentations up to a single site, and that allows the conference organizers then, once the call for papers closes, to then review all of that presentation material, accept a whole bunch of papers, maybe not accept some, or maybe send some back to their authors for a rework in order to hopefully get accepted. So it is that large bulk of data that large conference organizers and associations need to deal with many times. So we've taken a standard size conference, call it a 350 presentation conference, and that can have 350 or more authors because for many organizations, a single presentation or a single paper can have more than one author, 2, 3. I've seen presentations that have upwards of 10, 15, and 20 different authors. So when trying to create schedules for large conferences like that, again, over many days and with multiple streams, multiple threads, Juggler is able to take all that data, and in the course of creating a single schedule, it will perform approximately 1 trillion calculations. It will produce 8 billion approximately different sessions. It will test around 24 billion different constraints. So that's those statistics are really meant to frame the problem. And the problem is that there are many calculations, many things that need to go into considering how to pull together a schedule, not just any schedule, but a schedule that is conflict-free, that is free of conflicts. And many scientific program committees are doing the best they can with the tools that are available today, and those tools really are limited to a couple of different things. Can be something as simple as an Excel spreadsheet, or it can be something a little bit more sophisticated like an electronic post-it note style software scheduling tool, or even a relational database. But the bottom line is that even with those tools, the number of calculations and the number of different constraints that oftentimes need to be taken into consideration are just too much for these types of tools, which is why it oftentimes takes a lot of time, many hours. We've heard We've been talking to people here. We're located here in the Greater Toronto Area. We've been talking to people involved in the conference industry here in Toronto, and they've related stories to us about large medical conferences that would fly 7, 8, 10 people to Toronto a few months in advance of the conference, have them sequestered in a room for an entire weekend to do nothing but create the schedule. So you can think of the cost of housing people, flying people, feeding people, and having people sitting around a table for 8, 10, 12 hours a day, doing nothing but trying to come up with a conference schedule. It's a huge amount of resources. So having said that, I sort of have already framed the problem a little bit, but I'm going to go into a little bit more detail of it around it in a moment. We're going to spend some time today talking about different methodologies that have been applied to try and solve this conference scheduling problem. And the two methodologies that we're going to talk about and the tools that have often been used associated with those methodologies, the intuitive approach and the linear programming approach. We're then going to talk about how Juggler approaches the solution for this problem, and it's something that we term constraint-guided heuristics. And then we'll round it out and allow for some questions and answers, and provide you with an opportunity, of course, to stay in touch with us and ask us any follow-up questions that may come to mind after the presentation. So, talking about the problem. We, again, are talking about large conferences with multiple days, many hundreds of different presentations that need scheduling, many more hundreds of authors or presenters, as I noted earlier. Many papers can have multiple authors, 3, 4, 10, 20, multiple rooms with sessions that are intended to run concurrently, and not just rooms, but those rooms potentially could have different attributes. We were providing support on a conference during the summer last year, and they had 7, 8 concurrent room sessions going at any one time. And of those 7 or 8 rooms, 3 of them had setups for AV recording and simultaneous translation. So clearly there were some presentations that needed recording, some presentations that needed simultaneous translation, and a whole bunch of presentations that didn't. So how do you schedule around that in an efficient manner to make sure that the right presentation gets into the right room? There are also many conferences that have multiple session themes or strands or threads, whatever terminology you want to use. And oftentimes conference organizers like to make sure that attendees have an opportunity to maximize the number of sessions they're attending in a given stream or thread. So how do you make sure that when performing the conference scheduling, that you don't have too many, or you minimize the number of presentations of the same stream or thread that are running at any concurrent time, in order to be able to maximize the number of different presentations in a given theme that attendees can take part in. So that's another factor. And of course, things are always changing. If you're involved in conference organizing at all, and I'm sure most of you out there watching and listening today are involved in conference organizing in some way or another, you'll know that things are constantly changing, and the closer you get to the actual conference dates, things just seem to change faster and faster. I know many associations put in place stipulations that any presenting author needs to be present, for instance, for the entire 3 or 4 days of the conference. And I know associations do that simply because up until now, it has been too difficult a problem for them to ensure that individual presenter schedules are taken into consideration in putting together the entire conference schedule. Well, I'm here to give everyone some good news that those days are over, that there is a software tool, and it's called Juggler, that can take into consideration individual presenter schedules. So if you have a keynote speaker, for instance, or well-known speakers that you want to make sure are present, but they can only be present at your in-person conference, let's say for one of the 4 days, well, then you can set Juggler up and allow the software to make sure that any of those sessions that speaker or those speakers are scheduled into only occur on that one day and are not scheduled for any other day. And this all happens automatically. So that sort of frames the problem. There's a lot going on in scheduling conferences, and so let's spend some time now and go through some of the different methodologies that have been used in up until now in trying to solve this conference scheduling problem. So first of all, there's an approach that we call the intuitive approach. And if I'm just taking a look at my YouTube live stream now, I see that there may be a little bit of a lag in my broadcast. So I'm going to spend a little bit of time, slow down a little bit, just make sure that everyone is able to keep up and the slides are able to keep up with my audio. So the first approach is the intuitive approach. And what the intuitive approach to conference scheduling says is that the best, actually I should stay away from using a term like best. I think I'll use the term effective. So the most effective way of scheduling any conference will be to schedule or slot the most difficult sessions first. So that would be the most popular speakers who would likely require the largest rooms, for instance, longest presentations, unopposed presentations, maybe sponsored sessions if you're a conference that has sponsors. Maybe you have a sponsored session that you want to make sure the sponsor is highlighted. You want to make sure that's unopposed. So those would be the most difficult sessions. So you slot those in, you schedule those in first, and then essentially you try and schedule everything else in a descending order of difficulty. And that's what the second bullet point says. So as sessions become less and less constrained, you then deal with those sessions in descending order. And those sessions would be maybe the shorter sessions or those with new authors who may not be as well known as some of the larger, better named people in the field, and so on. So what one gets typically with that approach is a schedule that has a lot of author conflicts, has a lot of session conflicts, and it has a lot of room conflicts. So let's just take a short, brief look at the tools that are traditionally used to handle the intuitive approach. And those would be spreadsheets or the electronic post-it note style applications. We're familiar with both of them. We've used both of them, and they both essentially have the same problem, and that is each individual session or presentation needs to be manually slotted sequentially one at a time. So that, first of all, that takes a lot of time, and as I said earlier, that potentially can create some conflicts depending on the type of software that you're using. If you're using a spreadsheet, there's likely little to no conflict checking going on in the spreadsheet. And by conflict checking, I'm essentially referring with these tools, I'm essentially referring to presenter conflicts, making sure that the same presenter isn't being scheduled into two different sessions in two different rooms at the same time. And that is typically the limit to uh, conflict checking that the existing tools can handle. So with the electronic post-it notes, you sequentially pick one presentation, you go down in descending order of difficulty, you slot them, and then there's usually a button with the tool that says check for conflicts. And then it will list the 7, 10, or 100 different conflicts. And then you're left with the situation of now having to manually resolve all those conflicts. It's a very manual, very sequential process. And even more so with spreadsheets, because typically they will have a very limited amount of conflict checking to go with them. So then it's just a matter of eyeballing it. And that, of course, leads to other issues with potential conflicts being missed. So then once the conflicts are uh, highlighted, depending on which tool you're using, then of course the schedule needs to be reworked again in order to clear up those conflicts and then check for new conflicts. So, and that actually reminds me of a story. We were doing work for a client back in 2018, and they were using a relational database product to slot and schedule their entire conference. And again, it was a very sequential, going through one presentation at a time, picking a day, picking a time slot, picking a room, and then they would present us with that data, and they would ask us to run that data through a different piece of software. This was before Juggler was developed, a different piece of software, and check for those presenter conflicts. And so we would go through that iterative process. The first time they sent us the spreadsheet of data, there were 20, 25 conflicts. We would send it back to them, highlight the conflicts. They changed things around. They would send us another data set. The next time there were 17 or 15 conflicts. And we just keep doing that iterative process one after the other. I think we did 3 or 4 or 5 rounds of iterations like that before all of the conflicts were resolved. And this was over a week, 10 days, 2-week process. So very time consuming and very iterative and very labor intensive. And that's typically the pain that people feel when doing this. So the advantages of the iterative approach is that there are many tools out there to support the work. And as I've said before, there's spreadsheets, there are relational databases, there's the post-it note style software applications. There are people who like to put post-it notes up on the wall, I'm sure, to visually see it. So there's all sorts of tools that can be used. None of those tools really have been specifically designed to deal with the conference scheduling problem. And that's probably their greatest drawback, is that, yes, it's a tool that can provide some support, but it's not a tailor-made tool for the problem. And yes, some of these tools can provide for some level of conflict checking. As I've alluded to before, that conflict checking is usually very limited and is usually only in place to deal with direct presenter conflicts, to make sure that the same presenter isn't scheduled for two different papers in two different rooms at the same time. So I think you can probably get a sense for where I'm going. We've talked about the advantages. You can probably get a sense of where I'm going as far as disadvantages go. And as far as disadvantages are concerned, yes, it's a very time-consuming and labor-intensive process, as each presentation has to be manually scheduled. Every time a schedule addition or change is made, that generally speaks to the need to do a full check against all other presentations in order to ensure that no new conflicts have been introduced. And that's an important point because many people might think that, well, I just changed one little thing here, and so it's not going to make a big difference. But it's amazing. You change one little data item, and it, uh, it can have very it can have effects that are really unintended and unanticipated. So that's why we always recommend to our clients that when changes are made, a full set of conflict checks are needed, and that, of course, increases the level of difficulty if you're using this intuitive approach. So enough about the intuitive approach. I want to speak to the next approach that has been used to solve this conference scheduling problem, and that is called linear programming. Linear programming is a decades-old mathematical approach. It's a very formal piece of, I shouldn't say piece, it's a formal mathematical approach. It's used in operations research. It's been used for many, many decades by government, by businesses, most notably the courier companies that you and I are all used to receiving packages from. They certainly do use linear programming to optimize their truck delivery schedules. Manufacturing companies use linear programming to optimize their production schedules to make sure that their raw materials come in at the right time for the needed production schedule, to make sure they have the right level of raw materials, that they're not warehousing stuff that they don't need to warehouse. So it's been used for, as I said, many decades, and it is really used to achieve optimized solutions. So optimized solutions could be highest profit, lowest cost, fastest production time, minimizing warehousing of raw materials, as I said, and it uses a mathematical model in which various constraining factors or constraints are represented by linear relationships. Linear meaning like one-to-one relationships. So the typical easy example that's always used, I gave you one example already, but the other typical example is the traveling salesman problem, where you have a traveling salesman who starts out from his home city, let's say Toronto, and has a list of different cities with customers that he or she needs to visit. And the objective then of a linear programming solution would be to make sure that the salesman starts at the home sitting starting point and generates or best determines the shortest possible route to visit each city and then return to his or her starting point. So that's linear programming operations research. As I said, it has been used previously to try and solve the conference scheduling problem. And there was an attempt made back in 2017 to use linear programming to solve the conference scheduling problem. All right, thank you. Well, apologies for that, ladies and gentlemen. Not sure what happened with the stream, but we will continue from where we were. And again, our apologies for the technology. So as I believe I was mentioning a couple of minutes ago when we got so rudely interrupted, there was an attempt made back in 2017 to make use of linear programming to solve the conference scheduling problem. And I've provided the link to that information up on this slide here. I'm not going to dive into that in detail. You can, for sure, if you're more interested, uh, you can click that link and do some more reading on it as well yourself. But just to talk about some of the details around that, the programming solution that was attempted incorporated a number of constraints, and the constraints that were included for consideration were multiple rooms of different sizes, talk slots of varying length or lengths, talks with varying lengths. The obvious one that speakers cannot give two talks at the same time. Glad they included that one in there. And they also included speakers that have availability constraints. So going back to the example that I gave earlier in the webinar, the fact that there are some speakers, maybe more well-known speakers, who simply can only be there for one day out of the 3 or 4, and you want to make sure you slot them in on that day and not on any other day. So the goal of the linear programming optimization, or the calculated solution in this use case, was designed to optimize speaker satisfaction. And satisfaction is one of those very subjective words that could mean almost anything to different people. But they did do a good job of defining what their mathematical model, or at least how their mathematical model defined the term satisfaction. And that was to only assign one talk per slot, that all talks need to be assigned, so in other words, not to have any unassigned sessions. Talks needed to fit their assigned slots. Speakers may not be available during certain time slots. A speaker can give more than one talk, not at the same time, but a speaker can give more than one talk, and each room can be assigned one or more slots. So that's how speaker satisfaction was defined for this linear programming optimization. And the advantages of using linear programming to solve this, and the people who did this in Europe, they were pretty smart to try and apply a linear programming solution to this problem, because it is a very well-established mathematical model that's been used, as I said earlier, for decades to achieve optimized solutions. Theoretically, it's extremely robust math. It's used in many different industries: transportation, like airlines, trucking, etc., logistics, manufacturing. It really spans the spectrum of different industries. And there are definitely commercial implementations of linear programming calculators available. And there are even some. We did last week, we did a check on using Mr. Google, and there are certainly linear programming calculators that are available for free up on the internet. So very robust, easy to access these calculators. The math is very sound underlying the calculations. The disadvantages, though, of using a linear programming solution really are quite core disadvantages. And I'm going to deal with them in ascending order. We personally are not aware of any commercially available solutions that have been extended to handle the conference scheduling problem. So that's the least of the problems, because linear programming is linear programming, the math is the math. a solution, if a commercial solution doesn't exist, one can be created because the math is the math. But as I said, that's the least of the problems. The next issue is that existing scheduling solutions, at least the one that this group in Europe tried, are limited in terms of the number of constraints that they can model or in their ability to successfully generate real world complex solutions. And what do I mean by a real world complex solution? I mean a solution for that large conference with 10 concurrent rooms with multiple themes, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. The solution that this group in Europe tried would certainly not be able to handle that. Excuse me for one moment. Okay, back again. The the final disadvantage, which really is the biggest one, is that linear programming as a tool is a great tool, but not all constraints can be modeled because not all constraints are linear. Um, if you're going to use a tool that requires the constraints to be linear in definition, in other words, one-to-one solutions, you really can't, I shouldn't say can't, it will be much more difficult to apply a tool that's based on linear relationships to defining constraints or modeling constraints that are nonlinear. You then get into a lot more sophisticated math, and it becomes a problem whose eventual time of creating a tool will probably be greater than the time involved in just using the intuitive approach to solve it. So there's not much point in spending more time to create a tool when you could just use the intuitive approach and get to your solution likely in less time. So that then takes us to the approach that Juggler takes. And as I noted earlier in my presentation, the Juggler approach is something that we call constraint-guided heuristics. And so I'm going to speak about that now. Um, Constraint-guided heuristics is an approach that leverages the power of our proprietary computational algorithms that underlies what Juggler does and some pretty state-of-the-art advanced mathematics. And by state-of-the-art, I'm speaking about essentially PhD level math. We have been able to take that, model it, create a software solution that models that high level mathematics, which quite honestly nobody else out there has been able to do so far. Our approach, our tool, has been designed specifically to solve the conference scheduling problem. It hasn't been designed to be used in operations research for logistics companies or manufacturing companies where linear programming is likely a more effective tool. It has been designed purely to deal with the conference scheduling problem. And as I noted in my introduction, we developed the software with conference scheduling in mind because of all the issues we ourselves ran into when providing support to some of our clients who are putting on conferences, and the issues that other people that we've spoken to in the conference industry, at associations, at PCOs, everyone says the same thing, that when the scientific programming committee gets together, it is a horrendous task to schedule a full in-person conference of any significant size. So that's why that third bullet point is there, is that the software has been designed, yes, by professional software developers, but it's been designed more so by a team that understands the conference industry and that understands large conference planning. So Juggler as a software tool really uses a simple four-step process. The first step is making sure, in keeping with the title of today's webinar, a data-driven approach, the very first step is data focused, and that is data input. So taking all of that data that an association or a conference planner or organizer has that has come in through your content management system, your call for paper system, all of those hundreds of presentations with all of the authors and all of the bios and the abstracts and all of that good information, take all of the sessions that have been approved, noting their presenters, and importantly, noting what sort of attendee draw particular presentations might have. Now, there are different approaches to organizing a conference. Some associations require people to register in advance for breakout sessions. Some associations just have everything open and have the content running on a particular schedule, and attendees are free to come and go as they wish from one session to another. Or there are conferences that use a hybrid approach where some sessions may require advanced registration while others are completely open. So understanding how the conference is pulled together, understanding what each presentation is, who the presenters are, and their expected draws is critically important. So there's the presentations on one end. Presentations are held, typically, is for sure for in-person conferences, are held in rooms. So rooms have various attributes assigned to them as well. They have various capacities, they have available AV equipment, they have conference translation equipment perhaps set up, and they also have accessibility requirements. So understanding those rooms and having that data available is also important. And this is typically data that conference organizers, associations already have available because they need it to organize. Obviously, conference dates, defined conference time blocks are also important to have, and presentation and or presenter constraints that I've alluded to previously. All of this data associations already have. So Juggler as a software tool is basing all of its calculations not on new data that people need to create or collate, but on data that they already have at their fingertips, so to speak. So the next step then, after all that data is simply pulled together, then comes the data analysis step, and that's step 2. So Juggler then imports all of that data, and the import process is quite simple through spreadsheets. It analyzes the presentations, the presenters, the time blocks in all the rooms, and it also analyzes all of the corresponding constraints that have been defined for the given conference. So there could be presentation room constraints. In other words, certain presentations have to take place in certain rooms. There are going to be presenter-to-presenter constraints. Presenters, especially those presentations that have multiple presenters, those presenters may need to be in the room where all of those presenters may need to be in the room when the presentation is going on. So even though the primary presenter may not have a conflict with a certain day, time, room placement, other authors in that same paper may have conflicts. So all of those presenter-to-presenter constraints need to be recognized and analyzed. Certain presenters may have time constraints, and I've spoken about that earlier. There are also themes, track, or strand constraints, and I noted that at the beginning of my presentation, where many conferences want to maximize the opportunity for attendees to be in sessions within a given theme or track, so to be able to maximize the attendance of all the presentations in a particular theme or track. There are presentation to presentation constraints. Some presentations may need to be linked to other presentations, and there are also room attribute constraints. Again, the example, certain presentations are ones that have to be recorded, so they have to be scheduled in a room where that recording AV support is available. The same goes for simultaneous translation. The same could also go for accessibility issues. There may be a conference venue or a hotel venue where some rooms are on a ground floor and they're completely accessible with no time delay in transiting from one room to another, particularly for people who might be in wheelchairs or may have to use mobility assists. There may be other presentation rooms that are up on a second, third, fourth floor, for which, yes, there are escalators or maybe an elevator, and that may bring in play some transit time delays for people to get from one presentation room to another. So that's also something to keep in mind and is a constraint that Juggler is able to handle. So in terms of the actual math that Juggler uses, as I said, it uses our proprietary computational algorithms. It groups presentations by themes or strands into various sessions. It will respect expected draws between presentations, so it groups them into rooms of appropriate sizes. So for instance, if you have that big presentation where you're expecting 500 or 1,000 people, it's not going to try and schedule it into a room that has a capacity of 25, let's say. So that's an important consideration. It also is able to ensure that presentations that are flagged as unopposed will be scheduled as unopposed. So that's an important consideration that the software is able to handle. And most importantly, when it does generate a schedule, it will generate schedules that avoid all conflicts. If the conflict or the constraining factor is set up in the software for the conference, then Juggler will ensure that all conflicts will be avoided. There certainly may be times when some sessions cannot be scheduled, and Juggler as an application will also report on that. And I'll dive into that right now. So in terms of the output that Juggler produces, it basically imports a spreadsheet, it performs its data analysis, and it outputs a spreadsheet as well. So each presentation will be shown as a separate data row and will be scheduled into a specific date time room block. Juggler data output includes all the scheduled presentations. It separately lists any presentations that could not be scheduled, and it also will generate a log file explaining the reason why there may be unscheduled presentations. And unscheduled presentations can occur for a number of different reasons. It could be that there simply is not enough concurrent room capacity to handle all of the presentations. So that certainly is one use case that we have run into. It could be that there is a particular unopposed presentation that could not be scheduled into an unopposed slot because there maybe was not one defined, or there was not a sufficient number of slots, unopposed slots defined. So those are a couple of reasons why particular presentations might not be scheduled, but as I said, Juggler reports on that. So then comes the review and reanalyze phase, and the subsequent analysis is really short because, as I said, the whole point of Juggler is to generate conflict-free schedules. So after the first round of generating schedules, if there are any unscheduled presentations, it's usually limited to a handful. As I said, there's a log file that explains the reason why the presentation could not get scheduled. So then it would just be a matter of perhaps adding another room or modifying a constraint and then just resubmit the data to Juggler, and usually any unscheduled presentations usually get resolved during the second run. And given that a run, any particular data run to generate a single schedule will take 3 minutes, maybe 4 minutes, the process is really, really fast. So there isn't the the time investment of hours upon hours of getting this done. So I see it's 5 minutes to the hour. I've gone a little bit longer, likely because of that little broadcast interruption that we had. So I'm just taking a quick look at the chat panel right now, and I see, I'm just taking a quick look at it. I do see a question in here. And if any of you out there have questions, by all means, now's the time to type them in. I'm happy to use the next few minutes to address them. So there was a question input here. If attendance is lower than expected and the number of rooms need to be reduced to save money, how does Juggler handle this? Well, that's a great question, and thank you very much for asking that question. This was actually one of the use cases that Juggler was designed to deal with, and it is something that did come up at one of our clients where Juggler was used back last year during the summer, owing to the bad economy that sort of hit the entire Western world come March, April of 2023. Oh, I see lots of questions coming in now. Thank you. We had a client who was expecting 800 plus attendees at their conference, and then come the April timeframe, presenters started withdrawing sessions because they could not get funding to attend the conference. So the association found itself in the position of now having more room capacity than it needed because of those sessions that were withdrawn. So we then were able very quickly to modify the presentation data set, remove the presentations that were withdrawn, and then remove 1 or 2 rooms from how Juggler was configured to handle this particular conference. And we were able to reschedule everything in a matter of minutes, making do with, we first tried it with 3 rooms, found that we had a number of sessions that, or presentations that could not be scheduled. So we put 1 room back, therefore reducing it by 2 rooms from the original, and then we're able to schedule everything. So because we had the original data set with every presentation's originally scheduled date, time, and room, and because we now had a new data set with all of the non-withdrawn presentations and potentially a new date, a new time, and a new room, we were easily able to email all of the presenters on behalf of our client and basically tell them that your presentation, which was originally scheduled on this day for this time in this room, has now been changed to the new day, the new time, and the new room. And it was pretty seamless, not confusing. People got an email, people got follow-up emails. And so Juggler was literally able to save this client approximately 15,000 US dollars by dropping those 2 rooms, which was an amazing saving. So I hope that addressed the question. The bottom line is that Juggler was able to handle that quite easily and was able to bring a solution in place. So I see it's 11 o'clock. I'm going to go an extra few minutes because we did have that interruption. We've got a few other questions. So one of the questions is, we sometimes change room configurations during our conference, adding or removing seats. Can Juggler handle this? Absolutely. Juggler is able to handle changes in room configurations. Essentially, a change in a room configuration means that the capacity of the room has been altered. And so Juggler can easily handle that. It would simply mean going into the way the tool is configured for that conference. And if the room configuration change meant that originally the room was able to handle 100 people capacity, and now it can only handle 50, then Juggler will be able to take that and will be able to reschedule schedule presentations in that room. It will then remove the presentations that that had an expected draw of greater than 50, and it potentially could pull other presentations that were scheduled into other rooms into this rejigged room. So yes, the short answer is Juggler can certainly handle that scenario as well. Um, I see another question here. What if the co-chairs don't want to present at 8 a.m.? Can I set up Juggler so that they can get the 10 a.m. time slot? Absolutely. We made use of this particular ability of Juggler at this same conference that I spoke about earlier that occurred in the summer of 2023. We had one of the days of the conferences actually turned out to be a day where there was a day of religious fasting. And so some people did not want to be, who were originally scheduled to present on that day, uh, for obvious reasons, didn't want to run the risk of pushing their bodies to be standing up there presenting on a day that they were fasting. So we were able to change the actual day that the people were originally scheduled to present to a different day, but the same thing goes for time as well. If Franklin Smith, for instance, is scheduled to present at a conference, and there's no way I want to present at 8 a.m., absolutely Juggler can be set up with a constraint to tell it to make sure do not schedule Franklin Smith any earlier than 10 o'clock in the morning. So hopefully that addresses that question. And I see there's one more question that has been submitted, which perfect timing, we'll deal with it, and then I think I'll let everyone get on with their day. Can Juggler handle papers with many authors and avoid speaker conflicts if all authors want to be present at the presentation of their papers? Absolutely yes. That is one of the great strengths of Juggler. If you have a paper that has 20 authors and all 20 authors want to or need to be in the room, but yet you have 15 of those authors who are presenting other papers as well, yes, that constraining factor can be set up in Juggler to make sure that every author of every paper can be present for each of their papers. And that's when you start getting into situations, if you have a number of papers with many authors like that, you may very well run into a situation where a paper simply cannot be scheduled physically because there aren't sufficient slots, because there are just so many authors who absolutely need to be present. So there are ways of working around that, but we did notice that in another conference that Juggler was used in, is that there were a number of these types of presentations that had 15 or 20 authors, and there were there was one or two papers with that constraint in place where a paper could not get scheduled properly. So there are ways of working around that, but yes, the short answer to the question is that constraining factor is part of Juggler's capabilities. So I don't see any more questions. It is now 5 minutes after the hour. So I am going to, first of all, say thank you very much to everyone who attended today. We very much appreciate your time, your energy. If you're involved in the conference industry in any way, shape, or form, either as an association or as a PCO or as a consultant. Kudos to you guys for hanging in there during COVID. It was a tough slog. The industry definitely saw some shocks that it hadn't seen in a long time. We're thrilled that the in-person conference industry is coming back now. It has been great to present this to you today. And I'm just going to turn my camera back on for a quick second. I've put a slide up on the screen. If anyone needs to get in touch with us, you can get in touch with me. That's my telephone number in Toronto. That's my email address, franklin@jugglerschedule.com. And again, we were thrilled to have attendance from Canada, United States, Central America, people representing conferences in Europe as well. So thank you very much for being here today, and have a great rest of your day, everyone. Take care. Bye-bye.